Dr. Power, your guests have arrived.
Oh, thanks, Bonnycastle. Hi, folks. Come on in and have a seat. Yep, two more over here. What do you got in the news today, Bonnycastle? Anything for you?
Well, it's mostly election, but I did find one interesting article on another topic, and that was regarding the German Parliament, and they have put forward a proposition that by 2030 that they should have only zero-emission vehicles on the road in the European Union.
That's a big country. 14 years from now, there will be no fossil fuel cars.
No internal combustion engines.
And they're kind of the leaders in the European Union. They sort of direct, and if they go one way generally, the other 27 states follow.
It would seem that way. So, like I say, it's not a law.
Interesting.
But it's an interesting look towards the future.
One more chip at the fossil fuel industry. Yeah, excellent. Well, thank you. Hi, folks. Well, yeah, I'm glad you joined me today. Let me. Bonnycastle's always good that way. He's always got some good little tidbits when I come in. Things that, excellent little tidbits of information that I miss, and I appreciate it from all sources. Good man, and hopefully someday you'll meet him. The purpose today, let's see, I want to talk about the assignment number 1. Do my best to finish up the marking this week, get them back to you. So far, they're looking good on the grades, nothing to be concerned about. It takes them over an hour for me to mark each one, and with my day job and the national tours I've been doing, meeting the alumni chapters across Canada, to keep my life pretty busy for a bit. But the good news is it settles down after, well, last week. I guess you see this on Monday, so last Thursday night I went to Vancouver to speak with our alumni there, and just one more hit now in Victoria. On the 8th of November, I'll be speaking here in Victoria to the alumni to share some thoughts and to say hello and to help build that esprit de whatever within the alumni, esprit de corps within the alumni. So that's what I'm trying to do. Assignment number 2 is a different format altogether. Assignment 1 was basically, here are the PowerPoints, here are your slides 1, 2, 3, 4, and give me some sense of what I'm looking at and draw some conclusions, and that's all I wanted. Now, assignment number 2 is a slightly different model, a little bit more formal. And it's pretty well stated, but I thought I'd just review it very quickly if I could. I would expect most of them would have a cover page, an index, an executive summary, intro, body, conclusion, some sort of appendixes if you're going to use them, certainly some page for references or bibliography, and that should be just about what I require. Now, within the intro, body, conclusion, you don't have to follow this format, but what might work to understand you're writing for me. Whenever you write papers and business plans, etc., you ask who are the audience. If the audience is the bank to raise funds, then you put heavy weight on the financials, because that's what the banker wants to know. How do I get my money back? If you're doing a business plan for your employees, they're not so much into the financials. They want to get more of the details on how they move this thing ahead for what they need to know, or same for the marketing. So write to your audience, and you can assume that I know something about the Internet of Everything. So your introduction can be rather short as you sort of explain the Internet of Everything in 5 or 6 sentences, and then get right into your topic, whether that be, say, agriculture, or get into that zone. And then you may even want to identify, based on your research, you may have found a dozen interesting little tidbits if you want to share, and that's a bonus mark if you got some in your mind. But something like, here are 10 sort of innovative things that are going to change the agricultural industry because of the Internet of Everything, and maybe just a sentence just to explain it to make sure I understand them. But then, say, in the interest of time and page limitations, I'm only going to talk about these 1, 2, or 3 points, and then take each one of those points and develop a page or two on them, and then at the end, or in those sections, as long as you give me the so whats that arise from that, what are the implications on labor and downsizing and collaborative commons, and the idea of the cost coming down because of the robotics driving farm tractors, etc. That sort of thing is what I'd want to see. But how you present it, there's no wrong or right answers in this class. You'll probably find that out by now. It's substance rather than form for me. I just want to see you demonstrate some critical thinking, some reflective thought about the Internet of Everything in a particular area, and understand the changes that that's going to bring, and then just expand that in your own mind that every industry, every business, every sector is undergoing the same sort of experience right now as you speak. And it's just phenomenal, and you folks really represent, I think, within your own organizations, for most of you, on a bell curve, you're probably going to find yourself, you're in the top 10%, that your colleagues may have heard the name Internet of Things, but really haven't started to drill down and think about it as you have in the last few weeks. And over the next 4 or 5 weeks, we'll keep expanding that awareness, and that should position you quite nicely to consider how do you move your organization from that red ocean where you're fighting and fierce and trying to get 1 or 2 percentage points in market share, when there's a big blue ocean over here that this technology opens up the door for you, if you can reflectively think, how can I get into that and move my organization and reposition? So we talk about the oil and gas industry are fighting in this area here, fierce battles going on for 1 or 2 percentage points, when if they could just move off over into this side, into the blue ocean, it's a wide open market for alternative energy and be first movers in a lot of these fields. And to their credit, many are moving over and they see it coming, which is interesting. What else is on my mind? I'd like to talk about the CBC this week, which occurred to me was I read the article. Somebody sent it to me. One of the papers I marked, it was a link, an excellent paper on space. And I took the time to look at all the links they sent me. It's a fabulous paper. Quite enjoyed the read. It's a double-edged sword. The more I get enjoyed reading those, the slower I go for getting them all marked. But for me, it's like catnip. I get right in and get digging. So this was talking about small little $200 satellites that are being festooned around the Earth right now, going up and give us a global network where people in Africa and everywhere, no matter where you're sitting in the world, you'll have access to the internet rather than say, I don't have any signal here. And that's just a marvelous, marvelous thing. But if that is the case, and it's now underway, is the CBC relevant? I mean, the CBC came in that we needed a national for our culture, but also to provide this service to Canada's north and this 4,600 mile country of ours to reach all communities. We needed a CBC, a national voice, at least to pass the message and communicate. But today with these satellites, they have all the channels and things that you have sitting in downtown Toronto. And so the question becomes, each year from our taxes, we spend over $1 billion on the CBC. And this year they're talking about another $1 million. They want their budget increased, another $100 million, another $100 million to the $1 billion. That's a big number, particularly at a time we're looking for resources to say do R&D and Internet of Everything. Over $1 billion research and development would put a lot of stuff on the map for us. So are we spending the money wisely? So this week we could talk a little bit about the CBC. Is it still relevant today? Or are we really part of Marshall McLuhan's global village? Do we really need it? Do we not have enough coverage from the private sector on local community television channels and things to meet our requirements? Worth talk. Another thing I want to talk about today, if I can, it's emerged out of the... I think many of us are becoming aware that, in fact, one of the articles I think we talked about briefly online this week is that Trudeau's Economic Council said there's 9 million middle-class people, 5 to 10 years out, 4.5 million of those middle-class people are going to be unemployed. There's a need for 200,000 coders. And it led us to, with all the other cutbacks we're seeing in drone trucks and things, 250,000 truck drivers, etc., downside. Whatever the industry is, there's going to be less labor required, more productivity, but less labor, hence the cost will come down for things. Neat little article somebody sent me on the idea of McDonald's, 25,000 McDonald's sites opened up, robot-driven, 1 or 2 persons in there, but normally a McDonald's store would have 6 or 7 people for each shift, 3 shifts a day. There's 20-some-odd people coming and going each day, just getting your fries out the front. And if that can all be done at little or no cost once you do the capital cost of getting the robot doing this sort of stuff, where are all these laborers going? 20 people per outlet times 25,000. That's a big number of small little jobs that just disappeared or about to disappear. And if McDonald does it, generally in our industry as a consultant, you normally budget 1/3 of your sales has to go for labor costs. But if you just cut your labor costs at 1/3 down to something close to zero, not zero, but close to zero, you get a great marginal advantage over your competitor left and right. They're going to have to do the same thing, which is going to accelerate the problem. So it occurred to me we're going to have this great mass of people that are going to be underemployed or unemployed, and that's today. We're going to be stepping over in the streets. And if we don't want sort of an Arab Spring situation in Canada, how are we going to keep them engaged? And there's so much to this, and capitalism and how we price things, and maybe we don't do it anymore in dollars, but that's not for today's talk. Today's talk, I want you to think a little bit of flat tax in Canada. The idea of closing down all those people that are involved in taxes. I mean, you've seen a few people in Revenue Canada. The courts, the tax courts and things go through, accountants, lawyers that are involved in that sort of thing. All the buildings, the golden pension plans and all that sort of stuff get collapsed down in this sort of system if we just have a flat tax. That certainly is certainly is something we could be thinking about right now and do a cost-benefit analysis to see if it made sense. And so a flat tax might be something, there's no measure to the figures. If we said the first $30,000, there's no tax whatsoever. So people just getting up off the ground and single mums, etc., $30,000, there is no tax. But after that, no matter what you make, you're going to be taxed on it. So somebody like Warren Buffett, who makes a statement he pays less taxes than his stenographer, is going to pay full on what his total income is. Grab a number, 15, 18, 20% is what his tax is going to be. And that gets rid of all this. And frankly, every Canadian, I spend, I'm sure you do, but certainly I spend a week and a half at tax time just digging at all my pieces of paper, trying to get some semblance of order on the few things I do, and then going into the accountant and put it in. And the reality is Revenue Canada and the accountant don't really understand with guarantee to say this is the law. That's why you got interpretation bulletins. It takes them, they put it up and hope for the best, and then if not, you get challenged by Revenue Canada, and that's a cost to go through. All that is wasted time and wasted energy. It doesn't grow any potatoes. And so we need to look at that. So when we look at flat tax today, I see the Russian fleet is moving into the Mediterranean, steaming at full speed, trying to get fueled up in Spain. 7 ships, including an aircraft carrier, going to be lying off the Syrian coast. Also, the Russian ships are steaming towards Cuba, much like the Cuban Missile Crisis that we had under the Kennedy administration back in 63-ish. 63 or 61, 62 zone, I'm sorry, that's getting in that zone, steaming down, and they're not carrying missiles necessarily, but doing a show of force. And this is happening all around the world. The Chinese are doing it. Kim Jong-un is doing it. Many people are sticking it to America. There's no fear of America anymore. So we want to watch for that, just the sense of an emerging issue and increasing the tempo, those 6 domains of war we're talking about. The pressure is heating up a little bit, particularly during this time of lame duck presidents and things close to the election. That's of interest. I see Vancouver's putting more pressure on the Airbnb and the vacant houses. I think they're up 30% since 2001, and so there's more studies and more legislation and more command and control trying to come out of government over people's real estate in Vancouver. I guess the other thing popped in my mind is at the time of year for flu vaccinations, and I, for one, never take them because of my concern of what's in them, and sometimes they're not the right mix for that particular flu that year, and I'd rather just take my chances, and even as an old fart, I feel comfortable doing that. But I know many of you, particularly in the medical field, are going to take issue with that, so let's have a discussion and decide for ourselves, is a flu vaccination a good or a bad thing for us? So what else is in the paper? Mulrooney, one of our former presidents, time of Brian Mulrooney. They used to sing "When Irish Eyes Were Smiling." That kind of resonated with me. Mulrooney, bless his heart, is donating something close to a $60 million institute in St. FX, Antigonish in Nova Scotia, a great university, and setting it up. But the backstory on that is interesting because I remember at the time, Joe Clark took over as Prime Minister because nobody wanted the chair. He just ran for it, and there wasn't a great bunch of competition for it. But all that time, what we had is Paul Damaris with the Power Corporation, the Power Group out of Quebec, groomed young Mulrooney coming straight out of St. FX and made him the president of the Iron Ore Corporation, and groomed him and brought him along. And then we saw this takeover by the establishment at that time, who kicked Clark out and put Mulrooney in as Prime Minister. And I guess the point I'm making on this situation, that it's interesting to watch the role of lobbyists, the puppy masters that are behind the scenes. So we may well have a Prime Minister like Mulrooney, but please understand, behind Mulrooney there are people who have some strings they can pull to influence the direction things go. And that's true in all, well, no universal statements, but generally that's true in all governments. Safety minute, what's this about? Ontario, this is sad. We talked about this inmates in isolation, segregation in prisons, and this is just a tragedy. A 23-year-old, that's a young man, a young boy, 20, yes, he's old, but 23, I call him, at my age, I see him as a boy, First Nations man, has been sitting for 4 years in isolation without a break. 4 years. That's cruel and unusual punishment, no matter how you slice it. People go mentally stir-crazy doing that. And this young man has been subject to that because of the system. In fact, they go on here and say in Thunder Bay, it's in Ontario this is taking place, and they say it rests with the warden of the prison to make that decision, so the government won't get involved. They're hiding behind the warden making the decision. But it's 1,500 days in solitary this is just not right. We need to talk. We need to do something about that. That's not correct. He's in there because he killed another inmate in a fight. But of course, self-defense, whatever, we don't know the facts. The point is, this hasn't been heard yet, hasn't been adjudicated. It took place in 1912, and this is 4 years later, and he hasn't had the case heard yet. Can you imagine being held without a trial for 4 years? This is wrong on so many different levels. We need to look at this. But again, I talk about this being an industry. It's something that shouldn't be allowed. And it's interesting here, later on I'll talk about the Olin case. The brewery family, the St. John brewery family, to be distinct from the Olins that used to be in Halifax, and initially found guilty of murder of his father, now is getting a retrial. But what it shows to me, and without the facts of the case, it's not important, but what is important for us is the poor people, the people that can't afford justice, can't afford the lawyers, don't get retrials. They can't even get a trial in 4 years. And so my question is the Canadian judicial system broken? Are we getting a fair, balanced, quick adjudication as promised to us under the Charter of Rights that these things would be dispersed quickly? I don't think so, and this should not be allowed. We should rise up. We should tell the minister in charge of the Ontario prison systems this is just not appropriate. And because these First Nations are getting away with it, it's just wrong on so many levels. We're putting a new judge on. Like the Americans, our Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office get together and they look at all the folks that would make good judges for Canada. And we have Malcolm Rowe, whose name is being put up as the first nominee by Trudeau for our Supreme Court. And he's had his little appearance recently talking about the Liberal position on the Charter of Rights, speaks French, and on balance, it looks like he'd be a good man for the site. Not quite as contentious as it is in the States, but I don't think our courts, while active, aren't quite as judicially active as they are in the States. In Brazil, they're holding some elections down there. They're having an investigation, as there's thousands of reports of criminal interference and fraud in the municipal elections. That whole country is rampant with fraud. Their president and their immediate past president have both been indicted and are waiting for the courts. But we draw out of that the interesting thing that Trump's making allegations, and the Pew system, the Pew consulting group put a report out. They found 18 million dead people, 18 million people who are dead on the election rolls. Whether they get to vote or not, I don't know, but their names are still on the rolls. So if you walk in and say, I'm Joe Blow, and get away with it, then you can get to vote. So that's part of the grounds that Trump is saying that the elections may not be quite as accurate as they want to be. And I have to confess, and I was Bob Stanfield's president when he ran for prime minister many, many years ago. And we had a little get-together for one of our retiring 80-year-olds, which at the time seemed old. Today it's just around the corner. Retiring, Mary Hebb was her name, in Halifax. And she was a great old lady and supported and worked for the party for 50, 60 years. And Bob Stanfield knew her by first name and came up and said, Mary, tell me your secret. And Mary cackled and chuckled over a little glass of wine and said, well, I got a layaway plan, Bob. And I said, what's the layaway plan? She says, well, I have a rooming house right across from Camp Hill Cemetery, and when election time comes, I walk over there and take the names off the tombstones and stick them on the rolls for election, and I call that my layaway plan. And we chuckle. But in those days, of course, $2 bought you election, bought you a little bottle of rum, bought you a vote, and things have tightened up since the 50s and 60s. In any event, but that was just when I started as the campaign chairman, but Stanfield, of course, was much later. Anyway, that's the story there, but the question here is the election coming up, and how fraudulent, how criminal, are there any things to be concerned about? For the first time, our Governor General Johnson is heading off to Jordan, Israel, and the Palestine area to put Canada's best face on as a good friend of the area and an honest broker and trying to bring it back in, which is a complete 180-degree turn from Harper. Harper, when he was over there, he withdrew financial support from the pro-Palestinian NGOs. He was reluctant to condemn Israel's settlement on the West Bank, the construction going on. And Trudeau's come in and is reversing all those things and lifting sanctions on Iran, trying to put a more moderate face on Canada in the region. Well, I disagree with Trudeau on some of his socialist policies. I think this is good news, and so well done to that. But we could talk a little bit about the Middle East and maybe our position on Israel and the Palestinians, and do we have sort of a two-state solution, or what should it be? Nursing homes, death details. A former nurse here is charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder in what amounts to be angels of death, assisted death for some of the folks that she cared for in there, and she's now going to pay a price for that. But it leads us to the bigger question: is as the baby booms come in, the cost of healthcare goes on, and medically now can keep you going on different supports. At what point would you want to say, I want to pull the pin and I want assisted living? My pup, Yorkshire Terrier, before this one, had cancer, and I recall how humane it was to take her to the vet and hold her while she got an injection. And before I could count to 2 seconds, like 1001, she was gone. No whimper, no pain, just quietly shut her eyes and gone. And as much as it hurt, at that time I thought, how wonderful, what a humane way to transition from this world to the next, to take an injection. But anyway, she's facing the price for this. Her motives, I don't know, but the question is, should we allow that? Should it be properly legalized? And what are the issues pro and back and forth? I see Calais in France, just across the pond from the Brits. Shantytown, they call it the jungle, lots of migrants there, and they're breaking down the point. Certainly is a big issue in Europe. The question for us is what's happening, and we could again look at the migration and what's happening to the culture and the introduction of Sharia law, etc., into the European Union, and it is coming our way. And the question is, should we be concerned? I mean, Hillary, one of her WikiLeaks things the other day in a meeting in Brazil, said she wished that there'd be no barriers, boundaries, that it would be a flow of anybody North and South America could come and go in any direction, but the state boundaries would come down. Well, is that really the right thing? I mean, here's a situation in Europe that a young 10-year-old boy in a swimming pool was raped by a 20-year-old man, and his defense was it was a sexual emergency. Under Sharia law, the law grants him that defense, that it was an emergency. And I've heard that before with the rapes of the women occasionally. They say that's a defense under their law. So we could look at that. Help of the helper. Post-traumatic stress disorders, I see 2,500 RCMP. Generally that was reserved more for military folks, but increasingly, because our forces are so small, the RCMP and others get seconded to join the soldiers and go to Bosnia and these places, and so it's troubling, it's a concern. And then there's an article in here about Olin getting a new trial, and my point is simply that if you have money, you can get the maximum justice allowed, and if you don't have money, you'll sit for 4 years without a trial. Not good. In Ontario, our federal politics, we have the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau, during question period in the House, he's being criticized for attending a $1,500 plate dinner, rubber chicken, and generally what happens is people like oil companies and that will buy a table of 8 times 1,500, so it comes nicely to a $10,000 table, and that's how they fundraise, and that gives you access to the minister in this case to sit, talk, have a drink with, chat, express your thoughts, and possibly set up with his folks a chance for a face-to-face meeting in the office. That's not available to the average person. You can't afford a $1,500 rubber chicken dinner to get access to the ministry like this. So who speaks for you? How do you get this access? And they're trying to, should we put a ban on these big donors? Should they be allowed? Should lobbyists be allowed to do this? We should understand lobbying is a good thing. We need lobbyists to educate the ministers, to show them the new things, say fracking, whatever happens to be, have the discussions about it, and give them the pros and cons. It helps educate them in the research. So lobbying is good. But the problem is if it goes so far as that you can't, Hillary Clinton, if you go so far as unless you make a donation to her charitable donation to her organization, you can't get in the door to see the Secretary of State, then it's clearly wrong. And so my question here is, in Canada, who speaks for us if we continue this idea of big donors, or should we reduce the size of donors so you and I can afford to go, let's say $100 a ticket? Let's see what else is in over here. Gold is a little up from last week, around $12.73. Our dollar is down a penny, I think, 75 cents roughly, and oil is holding just under $50 a barrel. Our loonie is down, so as our loonie is down, the more buying power is down. We buy imported cars, so Fiat and Chrysler sales have to increase their prices in order to do that. Article in here about Alberta and Premier Rachel Notley. She has made the move that by 2030, she will close down all the coal-fired energy systems in the province. It's real, it's expensive, and it's billions of dollars worth of assets that will not be generating coal. She's saying what we're going to move towards is natural gas and renewables such as wind and solar. And we've been talking about that in this class. It's repositioning. Certainly that's going to impact, isn't it, on the use of coal and the buying coal and the price of coal. You would think, at least in Alberta, will come down, but offset, of course, is that China is increasing its coal for steel, and I know Teck Resources are doing extremely well in their selling of coal, but not so much to Alberta because that'll be drying down, but the Chinese will be consuming it big time. Apple begins its car operation system in Canada, just outside of Canada, which is just close to Ottawa. These are the whole platforms that actually make the operating systems, that the software that make the engines and make these drone cars, automated cars work. So it's very big for Canada to have it. But I think it happened in part because Apple alone is $181 billion, $181 billion in retained earnings profits outside of the States. A large part of that is in Canada, and so they have to use it. So Canada probably got the nod on this. For one reason is that we happen to have the profits here that they can't repatriate and take back into America without paying a 35% tax. And so they're prepared to spend it here. So that's good news for Canada, bad news for America. And indeed, that's what Donald Trump is talking about by dropping the tax rate down to 25%. He's hoping to encourage some of these companies to bring $2.1 trillion in total outside America, $2.1 trillion back in for investment into America, where they bring the jobs home. And so good news for us. Apple is setting up in Canada the software systems, but I suspect it's because the money was sitting here and they couldn't get it back into the States. Apple iPhone sales fall, which is strange because I thought with the Samsung pads and that burning up, that whole market by Samsung, I suspect, is collapsed. And so that's a wonderful time for people like Apple and other people in that sector to go after their business and go right in there quickly and try to steal those clients before they come out with their new product. So I would have thought their sales would not fall, but they would start to increase, maybe the next quarter. Another article here about crude rises, so does the outlook for deal making. Well, I'm not sure crude is rising. It's $50 a share, and I think the demand-supply curve, short of a black swan thing, it'll keep on softening. I mean, we just talked the opening thing here about Germany and the next 14 years going off fossil fuel for gas. Well, that hits your demand-supply curve. Notley talking in terms of going off coal into alternative energies. The numbers are coming down. In any event, what it's also an opportunity for is that whenever you get fierce competition or mature stage for an industry, introductory growth mature, that mature stage up there, when you get a very competitive red ocean situation, as there is in the oil patch right now because of the price is down, there's not a lot of flexibility, your margins are tight, it's a good time for mergers and acquisitions. And so we see Suncor Energies doing that, Imperial Oil, Cenovus Energies are doing that. They're all looking for people they can take over and can do some deals and squeeze out the little people. And not surprising, that's just a normal part of the state of the industry the way it is now. There's an article in here on agriculture, but it's stuff we've been talking about in this class, no big surprises. But they talk about agriculture coming on, and they talk in terms of, in Canada, 3,000 businesses are in the sector, employ 100,000 people. Agri-food industry employs 1 in 8 Canadians. Sorry, it's 2.3 million people employed. 1 in 8 Canadians work for agriculture. And they talk in terms of the, just what we talk about in this class, robotics for tractors, milking systems, smartphones to identify insects in the fields and predict, control the smart tractors, computing power, and analytics for all the data that they collect. Yeah, so the world is doing the same thing we're talking about here, but we're on that we're out in front of the wave a little bit on all industries and sectors, what's going on. Yeah, more Canadians are using payday loans and atrocious rates, and that signifies a failure in our banking system. That the underemployed, the poor, the people who least afford it, can't get bank books and checkbooks. Banks don't want to deal with them. Haven't got time for your $25 deposit, your $15 deposit, whatever it happens to be. And so they're underserved. They don't get the service from our banks. And so as a result, this payday loan system has sprung up, and they're just ripping these poor people off. And so it's something we need to look at, and maybe that's something, as much as I'm right-wing Attila the Hun, it seems to be we need banks that service all Canadians, not just the ones that at the top end and take the cream and leave the rest fend for themselves. Shoppers Drug Mart are going to sell pot. What do you think about that? Atlantic Canada trade rules, they are trying to change the trade rules on interprovincial trade, and it's about time, because this country of ours, there's over $10 billion that we lose every year, $10 billion in interprovincial trade, because one regulation doesn't marry the next regulation. So theoretically, you might have a truck taking products from Alberta, get stopped at the border because the width of the truck or the tail lights, etc., don't comply with the regulations on this side of the border. And if we remove some of those barriers to trade in Canada, before we start removing barriers to trade in NAFTA, that would be a good thing. We lose money on these interprovincial trade barriers. The oldest bank, world's oldest bank, fights to stay afloat. It's an Italian bank. Been around for 544 years, 544 years. The Hudson Bay Company, which is the oldest British corporation, 1670. So this is older than the Hudson Bay Corporation, 544 years. In any event, it's up against the wall. It's facing either recapitalization or possibly going down, but no big surprise. We've talked about these 51 banks throughout Europe. This was one of them. This is the Italy one. The Deutsche Bank is even worse off, and we're seeing these banks now right up against the wall under the stress test, getting their net free capital and selling off assets and getting ready for bailouts or trying to attract new cash. And it's quite serious. So keep watching these, because it, like dominoes, it can go click, click, click pretty quickly. So watch the banks. But something 544 years, and they got caught up in the derivatives and is now paying a price. What's on here? Caterpillar post lower earnings. And that's interesting. Global economic weakness, they cite. But whenever Caterpillar is the canary in the coal mine for me, I watch that, because if Caterpillar's not selling 640 front-end loaders and backhoes and things of this nature, that indicates to me the construction industry and the farming industry, global resources, rare earths, coal, those sort of things are dropping off. And so that's an indicator about the global economy going forward. And so I watch Caterpillar. If they say lower earnings, and that supports the notion that the economy is still a little soft out in front of us a little bit. Twitter, no big surprise, cutting more jobs. They cut last year, they're cutting this year, cutting people off. Yeah, no big surprise in this thing. It's the same with Obamacare, this thing. The American, because the American election right now, the administration is trying to make government look as good as it can look. From now till November the 8th, it's a pretty good time. After November the 8th, when the curtain gets drawn back, watch for all the fissures to start to show. The Twitters and the downsizing and things of this nature, and then the Obamacare situation hit a little bit early, but they couldn't hide it, and the race and the broken side of that, and the increases in fees that folks pay and the subsidies that they get, it's all coming to a head. And so after the election, no matter who gets elected, they're going to have a real tough time on trying to restore the balance in the vote, because the gloves will be off at that point. Good article in here in tech. Best Canadian performing stock. Tech is primarily in gold and some other commodities. Kind of got dragged down by the rest of the commodity companies. I remember I had some of them. I paid $4.85 for it about 5 years or 4 years ago. Now it's damn close to $30 a share. Unfortunately, I sold it. I was so disappointed with the sales. But my point is, it's good company, doing extremely well, going up. But they have to sell their gold, I suspect, to China as opposed to Alberta, the way things are going. Financial Planners article here about robots and doing that in their field. Market oversight, one of the last frontiers for artificial intelligence, the latest frontier for artificial intelligence. They want to use it now in the stock markets as a intelligence tool to do market surveillance, to watch the comings and goings and make sure everything's on the up and up. And they can go look in chat rooms for keywords and people trying to put pressure down. And that's really important. Like the Venture Exchange here, the Toronto Stock Exchange Venture, the Vancouver Exchange, is known for manipulation, and it's the weak sister of correctly, or the sort of the weak sister of the investment community, and some of the improprieties that seem to go on. And certainly manipulation is oftenly felt that it's a concern on the Vancouver Venture Exchange. And this machine could pick up those trades and things that are unusual in the driving down of stocks to artificially move the market. A good thing, a good thing. I think that's it. I was going to talk a little bit about Bloomberg today, but I think we'll just let it go at that. It's been a good day. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm enjoying working with you. Encourage you to call me anytime at the 472-3836 number. Enjoy the course. We're halfway through, just 4 more of these sessions. Bye now.